Simon's been running the Smart Towns programme on behalf of the Welsh Government for the past 2 years now. Throughout that time, we've been working closely with Owen Davies Consulting, who have supported loads of our towns through Smart Towns and also through their general day-to-day work. I'm sure you've seen Owen popping up on podcasts and on the BBC recently. So obviously, a big authority on smart towns in Wales. So it's really great to have the delivery manual now kind of bringing all of that knowledge together. And I hope you find, like we do, that it's a really user-friendly, really useful document as a kind of one-stop shop for everything that you need. Really sorry about the dog. So I guess on that note, I will mute myself and pass on to Adam. So thank you.
Thanks, Kiki. Right, I've got a few slides to whiz through, but I promised Kiki I would keep things quite short and sharp so we can actually focus on the conversation side of things. So unless anyone shouts, I'm going to assume you can see my beautiful slides. So yeah, thanks for having us. Just a bit of background. So Owen Davies Consulting, the company I work for, we're a consultancy specialising in placemaking, is the sort of on-trend term at the moment, which is sort of a mix of planning, regeneration, local economic development. We were founded in South Wales, I think in 2013, and we're still based in Abergavenny, and we work for public, private and third sector clients in Wales and across the UK, and focus on making places more memorable, livable and viable. We work with all sorts of partners on projects. Myself, so I'm talking today because I was the lead author, I suppose, of the delivery manual. I joined the company earlier this year. Before that, I was a sort of community-facing digital officer, I suppose, in a Welsh local authority, which is where I first got interested in and involved in the sort of smart town side of things and engaged with the Euro Smart Towns programme, as many people did. And yeah, part of my job was delivering digital projects in the community with mixed results, it's probably fair to say. So I learned a lot from doing that. I've got the scars to show from it. I suppose it's quite therapeutic then to bring a lot of that learning into the delivery manual. Before that role, I worked in monitoring and evaluation, which will explain, if you've had a chance to look at the manual so far, why there's quite a few mentions of monitoring and evaluation in there. My personal thing is I think it's been overlooked a fair bit at the moment. Obviously, Smart Towns Tech has got a big potential to help monitoring evaluation, but it's also, I think, important to consider that when we're implementing Smart Towns projects too. So yeah, that's a bit about us. A little bit more just to establish our credentials, I suppose. I mean, Kiki touched on it earlier, but the delivery manual we've produced hasn't been written by a company in our ivory co-working space, I suppose. We've been on the ground for quite a few years working with communities and been thinking, for a long time, but before I joined, certainly, about how to make places viable, livable, memorable. And I think over the past few years, we've realised that standard approaches to doing placemaking were sort of overlooking the role of digital data and tech, which seems quite short-sighted. So over the past couple of years, we've worked really closely with Smart Towns Cymru, Mentemon, and lots of local authorities in Wales, and we've developed this approach, which we're really proud of. We call it digital placemaking. And that sort of helps local communities, businesses, local authorities, developers to consider the opportunities provided by digital and data when they work to create better places, I suppose. Project-wise, in 2021, we were commissioned by Monmouthshire County Council, I think it was, to do a pilot project in Abergavenny, which is our hometown, I suppose. And that was a proof of concept that taking a sort of place-based, on-the-ground approach is the best way to get local place stakeholders interested in and excited by the potential for smart towns. We then worked with 4 other towns in Monmouthshire, because that's a very successful pilot, and then worked for Smart Towns Cymru, producing what we call pilot digital place plans. We were still developing our process, I suppose, and we still are now, for a further 10 towns and small cities across Wales. So the output of that process is generally a digital place plan. I could talk about it more now, but want to get talking about delivery manual. Loads of these plans are published on the Smart Towns Cymru website, so I urge you to check them out if you haven't already. We also delivered a grandly named masterclass for Smart Towns Cymru back in February, I think it was, which I'm sure is also available on the Smart Towns Cymru website, as are all the others. And also feel free to get in touch if you'd like to know more about our digital placemaking approach. From a lot of those place plans came some really good ideas, project ideas, but I think we got a lot of feedback then from local stakeholders that they needed more support to actually develop them into like a costed project, really, that's funding ready, whether that's public or private funding. And I think, you know, we recognised that, and we realised that we needed some technical support to help people, places do that. So we were really fortunate to work with Scott and Will from Sensibility and Gary from Morgan Walsh to help us with the technical aspects of the project. So I don't know if they're on, but thank you to them for their support. It was a pleasure to work with them. And then from that, then we produced case studies of some developing projects in 3 areas, alongside producing the delivery manual, which the idea is to capture the learning from those projects, I suppose, in that project development process, and put it in one place for future reference for everyone. And alongside the 3 developing projects case studies, we also produced a case study of Wrexham, showcasing the approach and the really good work that's been done there by Dave Evans and others. Those case studies, which my colleague Ian, who's on the call, led on, they're all available on the Smart Towns Cymru website, so please check those out. I think they accompany the case delivery manual quite nicely. I was going to talk about them in a bit more detail. I think I won't. Please look up the case studies. They're really interesting. We worked in Abergavenny around developing a green infrastructure monitoring project, in Bangor about developing, seeing how Smart Towns tech could help them monitor and understand the sort of effect on the city's soundscape. There are some concerns about antisocial behaviour there. And in Crickhowell, if you know Crickhowell, it's a really active place, lots of key local stakeholders, quite a successful place in many ways, but they wanted to see how Smart Towns tech could manage the pressures, I suppose, of being a really popular visitor destination. So they're really interesting 3 sort of set of projects. They're at different stages now. Some of them look really likely to happen. Some of them may happen in the future. So please, yes, check out the case studies. They're really useful, and we'll update those in future as well as those projects come on. So that is all to sort of explain that we've been in the trenches, I suppose, delivering Smart Towns projects, working out how to do it best, and that's all fed into this delivery manual that we've produced, which captures our learning. And the aim was to produce a really practical, you can do this document for Smart Towns Cymru, and it's a guide for how stakeholders can design, plan, deliver, and evaluate place-specific Smart Towns projects. And I think it's fair to say its main audience is sort of local authority and maybe town council officers or town centre managers, people in their communities interested in delivering Smart Towns projects. But I think, and we hope that the content is going to be useful for anyone sort of any sort of decision maker who's driving positive change in that place. One of the big things we learned from our digital place plan sort of experience, and we're still learning, is that despite the really good work of the Euro Smart Towns and Smart Towns Cymru, we still need to demystify Smart Towns. They're still complicated. So we made the delivery manual as accessible in language and tone as we could, I suppose, given the subject matter. And we've provided some sort of technical detail, I suppose, although argue what technical means, to help give those stakeholders a better understanding of Smart Towns tech. I know some of you on the call are sort of technology specialists in this field, far more advanced than we are. And I just want to say we're certainly not trying to do you out of a job by putting together this delivery manual. There's always going to be a place for specialists to implement things professionally. But we certainly think that everyone's life is made better and you get better outcomes if place stakeholders are better informed about the potential, the limitations, and the practical necessities of Smart Towns projects. So in terms of what's in the manual, just
sorry, we have got a deluge of people entering. The link on Eventbrite hasn't worked for some people, so I've sent it out again. So really sorry about that.
No worries. You're right for me to crack on.
Yeah, I've just muted everyone.
I've just got to the main bit anyway, so there you are. You've all missed a really thrilling introduction to the delivery manual. So again, I assume we had a little chat before I started. Sort of assumed that most people probably haven't looked at it yet. That's absolutely fine. So I will run you through it pretty quickly, and then I encourage you to, if you haven't, go in have a detailed look through afterwards, and send in questions, and we can have a discussion after as well. So in terms of its structure, the contents of the delivery manual, we provide a pretty short introduction with a few use cases to sort of set the scene. Again, the assumption is that if you're reading a smart towns delivery manual, you're probably interested in smart towns. So we didn't want to over-egg that, I suppose. And again, really recommend that people go to the Smart Towns Company website, which is a fantastic resource to find out more. Loads of case studies, loads of masterclasses, lots of good information. The main chunk of the delivery manual is setting out the delivery approach or a suggested delivery approach. There are 6 key stages we've broken it down into, and each one includes desired outcomes. So what you want to achieve by the end of that phase, a suggested approach, sort of what tasks you probably need to carry out to achieve that outcome. Not necessarily, you don't have to carry them out sequentially necessarily. And also a link to extra resources as well. So more detailed guides, examples, case studies. Again, inevitably that list isn't exhaustive. I'm sure we could develop it further in future. And I think we'll look to do that with Kiki and Mentormon. Delivery manual doesn't bang on about standard project management tasks and techniques, because I think it's a given that those are important and need developing, but it's not appropriate to go on about it too much in this document. And obviously the big caveat is that it's a suggested approach and it should be tailored to the place in the project. And also we're aware this is the real world and resources aren't limited. I mean, I worked in a local authority previously, so I'm very aware of that. But hopefully it provides a really useful framework for people to use, whatever resource and capacity they have. After delivery approach, we provide a sort of risk management table, I suppose, which contains some example risks. They are necessarily quite generic, but I think they're worth reading. And it provides a bit of a template for doing some risk management yourself, which is pretty critical to delivering any project. And the back end of the document is definitely a brief list of some information sources and suppliers who we know do sort of smart towns related work in Wales. Again, I know a lot of suppliers might be on this call, so we appreciate it's not an exhaustive list. And to be honest, a page in a static document isn't particularly the best place to put a directory like this. So hopefully that's something, again, we can develop, or the Smart Towns Company can develop in future. So just to talk you through each of the key delivery phases then, step by step. Again, please read the document in full at some point if you haven't already. I'll keep it quite high level now. So the first stage then is identifying the problem or opportunity that you want to address. And the outcome is that you have done that and you've considered what action you might want to take to address it. And this is in a way a bit of a precursor to a Smart Towns project. So again, in terms of key tasks, then you need to review your relevant strategic documents. We set out what those might be, because again, with our sort of placemaking background, we know where to look for things like that and what to look for, but that's not always obvious to everyone. So at a town level, that might be placemaking or place plans, master plans, strategies, action plans. If you're really lucky, it might be a digital place plan. If you're struggling to find something, again, this is my experience, local authority committee scrutiny reports are often quite useful. They often quite attach a lot of stuff which hasn't been flagged up really clearly. And again, look for documentation from previous Smart Towns projects as well. And therefore encourage anyone who's done a project, we'll touch on it at the end, to publish as much information about it as they can online somewhere, central resource. The second task then is identifying and engaging with place stakeholders. I've said the word stakeholders too many times already, and I'm going to say it too many times in future, but it's so important. If there's one takeaway, it's that you need to speak to people, you need to keep them up to date throughout your project, otherwise it's just going to cause problems. We really strongly advocate that when you do, especially at this stage, you speak to people, you start with the place and the issues, not the tech. It's really tempting to barrel in with some ideas but it's turn off for a lot of people that don't understand it. So start talking about the place and the issues, and then move on to potential tech solutions, potential smart town solutions after that. Again, the document contains suggestions of who those stakeholders might be in a place. If you're in a local authority, again, probably saying what people already know, but make sure you speak across directorates and departments. In my experience, it's amazing how someone else in another department might have done something really, really useful regarding underlying infrastructure, for example, that they didn't communicate very well. So ask around, because you never know what crops up. And then from that, identify some key stakeholders and work out how to keep them informed going on in later in the process. It could be a steering group, it could just be a Teams channel, it could be an email chain. It certainly doesn't have to be a meeting for meeting's sake, because they drive everyone mad. Then analyze the information you've got, use a SWOT or something like that, and try and get others involved in that process as well, so you don't get sort of one-track minded about what the potential solution might be. And then write a plan on a page, put this all together in a place and in a format that is digestible. Share that with your stakeholders, get their feedback, make sure you're all on the same page. And the main takeaway, I guess, from this stage is don't barrel into doing something without stopping and thinking about whether it's the best way to do it. With exciting new technology, smart towns things, there's obviously going to be an element of if you build it, they will come. But it should always be driven by the place and its priorities. We don't want sort of smart towns, white elephants popping up all over the place. Stage 2 then is exploring your possible solutions. And again, at the end of this, you want a good understanding of your possible solutions to the problem or opportunity you identified. Again, now you've got an idea of what you're looking at, engage with wider stakeholders, look elsewhere what other people have done and how they've tackled a similar problem or taken advantage of a good opportunity. Use Smart Towns Cymru in their resources, look more widely, reach out and speak to people as well. Most people are happy to share their learning about even if something didn't go so well. And I think when you have that conversation, ask about impact, ask about what has it achieved so far, with the recognition that some things are quite new and they haven't achieved things yet. Then do your market research, look at what is out there. If possible, speak to the developers, try and cut through the marketing hype, and don't be afraid to ask obvious questions. It's way better to do so now than later on once you've procured something and it all gets a bit sticky. Look at your funding sources. Again, consider how you might fund this, whether it's public or private. In the delivery manual, we set out a pretty brief overview of public funding opportunities as they stand now. Obviously, if you're in Wales, a big one there is the Transforming Towns programme. It's a placemaking grant, has a digital towns intervention, which is fantastic. A really great opportunity to do sort of smart towns work. But there's also the Shared Prosperity Fund, lots of digitally relevant bits of that as well. It may well be private funding, it may well be a local authority budget or a sort of town council budget. And then review and compare your options, then do a quick and dirty if needs be options appraisal or comparison. You define your different delivery options, you evaluate them against some sort of set criteria, and then you say which is the preferred option. It doesn't have to be terrifying task to do that. Obviously, the bigger the project, the more you're going to need to do that for your sort of due diligence. But it's good practice to do it, whatever the scale, I think. And again, to lean back on my key thing there is to share your findings with stakeholders as you go along. Third key stage is probably the chunkiest, the biggest, planning and procurement. So your outcomes there are to have a sort of costed plan in place of delivery and contracts in place as required. Step 1, you need to write a delivery plan, and a project plan. This doesn't have to be enormous and unwieldy, but it's got to contain the basics. And again, share it with the stakeholder group for feedback and keep it updated as you go along. Add in a basic change log. It can form the basis of a final report, which you might have to write, at least to keep your funders happy about anything else. So it's worth putting in the legwork early on. You will thank yourself later, as well as get better outcomes. Second step is then looking at sort of risk management. Again, it may sort of feel early, but now is the time to start thinking about risks and mitigating them. As I said, there's a generic sort of risk management table in the manual. It's all together after this section, although ideally it'd be broken up throughout, but it didn't work sort of layout wise. Use that as a starting point to consider the risks, what are the key risks to your project and how you can manage them. Then start thinking about data protection and compliance. Again, it's early, but it's a good time to do it. Many smart towns projects are going to involve personal data, I suppose, in some form. And I think, your organisation will probably have guidance on this, but it's always good practice to carry out a impact assessment if you're going to be going anywhere near personal data. Again, you don't have to start from scratch here. You can look at what others have done and improve it. In the manual, we provide an example of installing Wi-Fi access points that can count footfall. There's loads of good stuff out there, loads of existing resources, so use those and learn from them. Then what could be a huge can of worms, I suppose, so not going to go into a huge amount of detail, being procuring your goods and services as you require them. If it's public procurement, you can have your own rules and regulations around that. My sort of key takeaway is, seek advice. People have done it before. And if you've done the previous stages, it'll be so much easier. If you've done your homework, procurement is so much easier. Don't just go in blindly. That's when things go wrong and you don't get a good outcome. After that, smart towns wise, we're likely to have a mix of hardware and software. So you might be looking at identifying and securing permissions for install locations. You're going to work with your appointed contractor to get those in place. There's quite a big part of the delivery manual around this with sort of technology specific tips. So tips around placing Wi-Fi access points, LoRa gateway, sensors, etc. This is the section in particular where we wanted to share what we've learnt from people and sort of upskill, inform, place stakeholders so they don't have to start from scratch. Again, that section could be enormous. We've had to sort of condense it, but hopefully it would be a really useful section for people, because many places are still getting in place those basic building blocks of the Smart Towns projects, the underlying infrastructure. So it's really important. Again, engage with the key stakeholders, the term I've said so many times. Share the plan with people. If you get them involved in previous stages, there shouldn't be any surprises in it, but it's good to find out. And plan for monitoring and evaluation as well. I mentioned my background in monitoring and evaluation, so it's a bit of a hot topic, I suppose, and it's a huge topic in itself. But think at this early stage, how are you going to measure the success of your project? What data will you have about the project, and what data can you collect to inform this? Appreciate that many smart towns projects, but not all, are around generating better data to support more data-driven decision making. So it's you get a bit meta, I suppose, about measuring the effect of delivering the Smart Towns project, but practice what you preach, work out how you're going to measure whether what you're doing is successful or not, and write that down so that you actually hold yourself to following up on it later on. Then move on to the fun bit, I suppose, the installing and the maintaining. And the outcomes here, you want to have your new hardware and software installed, configured, functioning as expected. You want to have maintenance plans and protocols in place. So your contractor likely is going to install your hardware and configure your software. Really encourage them, as I'm sure they would, to test and sense check the data that is coming through. Part of your sort of schedule should be a testing phase. Again, our sort of understanding is that placement of LoRa gateways, sensors, etc. You can do so much from the desk or with a field like a site visit, but you can't, until things are installed, you can't be 100% confident that things will work as expected, and you might need to tweak things. Accept that, plan for it, build in a testing phase, and also, sense check the data. Is it saying what I would expect it to say broadly? If not, why is that? And again, confirm maintenance arrangements then. So you should have included this in your procurement if you're sort of thinking ahead. Again, Smart Towns project kit tends to be pretty robust and reliable. It's meant to be put somewhere really awkward and left there for quite a long time. That's part of the point. But things do happen. So make sure you've agreed with your contractor what your maintenance protocols are, how long something has to be down before it gets looked into, for example. Who lets who know about that. Now the point of it all, I suppose, is sharing and using the data. So at the end of this delivery phase, I suppose you want data being shared with your stakeholders, and ideally you want stakeholders starting to take decisions based on that data. Again, it's an enormous subject, but you first need to set up your system for sharing data with stakeholders, and you should have explored an agreed approach for doing this in the planning stages. There are loads of different approaches to do so, using something like Patrum, just putting stuff in an email. You're probably going to need more than one approach for different stakeholders, but you'll have explored that earlier on. And then you're going to need to support stakeholders to use the data. I think for me, this is a huge thing. We've done really, really well, particularly in Wales, about starting to get smart towns projects up and running, getting the infrastructure in place, doing some really, really exciting stuff. But I think not everyone sort of is comfortable with interpreting data, I suppose, and taking decisions based on that. I think there's a huge sort of skills demand there. I'm sure it's something that will become increasingly evident as we generate more and more data, I suppose. Auto-generating some charts on a dashboard is not the same as people using data. It's not a given that people can interpret charts correctly, let alone know the limits of what the data is saying. I think it's something that probably like AI might be able to help with in the future, doing a lot of the dirty work there and explaining it coherently. But that's a huge subject in itself. We're currently working in Powys actually on a project with a digital placemaking element, but also a skills element as well, working with Compass to explore, I suppose, skills requirements and how people can be supported to develop them. And I think sort of using and interpreting data is one of the themes that's coming out there. And then finally, then in terms of delivery phase, you've got stuff in place, you're generating your data. My monitoring and evaluation background says you need to monitor and evaluate. You need to know that your scheme's performance has been monitored and reviewed, that you're measuring and recording the benefits of what you've done, and that you've sort of recorded and shared lessons learned, so people, if they're going through something similar, can learn from what you've done. So yeah, monitor the performance and evaluate the effects, which is just putting in place the monitoring approach you planned earlier on. How satisfying. And then identifying, sharing lessons learned. Again, speak to your stakeholders, reflect on what went well, what didn't go so well, and what could be improved in the future, and feed this back as well. A sort of session like this, a networking session with Smart Towns Cymru, is a perfect place to do so for Smart Towns projects. So that was pretty rapid fire overview of what's in the delivery manual. If you haven't read it, please do so. It's linked to on the Smart Towns Cymru website. And yeah, well, probably have a conversation now, but if you have any sort of direct specific feedback, ideas, or sort of further questions, please get in touch. My details are on there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Adam. And yeah, sorry for the chaos with the link. I'm not sure why it worked for some people and not for others. But anyway, glad you could all make it in the end. Has anyone got any questions for Adam? Hi, Owen.
Hi, Kiki. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering if people can get on the as immediately. So sorry for that, Adam. I thought it might be useful. I missed a bit at the beginning, but can you just say a little bit more about how the delivery manual has evolved from actually the practical design of schemes with towns and town councils and local stakeholders? What was learnt from that you can find in the manual in terms of kind of the practicalities of doing this on the ground, people's kind of knowledge levels and working with experts who kind of come on the ground and see a place and work out what the solutions are. How does that get reflected in the manual?
Yeah, I think for me, there's that demystification element. Despite all the sort of good work being done so far, it's still really confusing, sort of smart towns concepts, and being able to speak to people about their place rather than tech is really important. What else would I say? I think the key theme for me is keeping people updated. I know that's doesn't applies way beyond smart towns projects, but identifying your stakeholders and keeping them in the loop about what's going well and what's not going so well, just really, really useful. I've been guilty of it myself, of course. We all probably have, when you don't keep people updated, they get grumpy, and they're gonna, you're gonna get worse outcomes at the end. So just do what you need to do to keep them in the loop, and do that in a sensible way. Yeah, I think I talked through the sort of case study work that we did in the 3 towns. So yeah, I'd again urge people to read those case studies as well, and that will fit nicely, I think, with the delivery manual.
Thanks, Owen. Did anyone have any other questions? I think what you were saying, Adam, was really interesting about cutting through the hype. Everyone's kind of pitching these things that are going to change the world. How do you recommend that people do cut through that hype and find out, especially if you're not from a techie background, as lots of people might not be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose speak to people who have done it before, I suppose, or used something or tried something. Use sessions like this to ask if anyone's done something similar or used a product. I think I mentioned it, but yeah, try and speak to the people developing it sort of face to face, if you like, even virtually. Don't just rely on sort of written information. People are usually much more sort of honest about the limitations, probably, or the challenges of implementing something when you speak to them. But yeah, I think just mainly it comes back to people sharing what they've done and what's gone well and what hasn't gone so well. I think if we all do more of that, get it in one or multiple places, then I think we'll all be in a lot better position to cut through the hype, I suppose, and work out what works and what doesn't.
Sorry, my dog is going crazy in the background. Are there any other questions? I'm just going to mute myself because he's going. Did you have something?
Yeah, I'm going to fill a void of a question. Again, maybe because maybe the lack of questions might be related to we missed kind of the front end that set the context, some of us. But Adam, is it helpful, if you haven't done it already, to kind of talk through a practical example that the case studies looked at? I understand in Abergavenny they're looking at using technology around managing the town centre in Bloom and the greening infrastructure. Is there a way of talking through an example of how the manual kind of guides you through maybe the designing of a smart kind of landscape management for your town centre?
I can, yeah, thank you. Not to put me on the spot. Yeah, so Abergavenny, really interesting. So obviously we had worked with stakeholders there to put together a digital place plan. And sort of one of the opportunities identified in that, I suppose, was yes, that Abergavenny is, I think, in the final of Britain in Bloom this year in the towns category, which is really exciting, really big thing for the town. But recognizing that comes with additional pressures on resources as well. So namely watering a lot of things, which is quite expensive. So yeah, the town council sort of knew what they wanted to look at, and thought sort of a digital smart towns approach might be able to help with that. So they put together a good stakeholder group, again with the volunteers looking after the green infrastructure, and we were able to sort of help them explore possible solutions, bringing in tech specialists as well, who looked at various bits of hardware that might be useful, and software as well. So we sort of helped them with that market research, I suppose. And similarly, I guess, help them review funding sources as well. We've got a good understanding of, from our placemaking work, of the sort of funding landscape in Wales, public funding landscape, although whether that'll be necessary to use or not, I'm not sure. And then, Yeah, they are at the moment. So they've got a really, we worked, as the case study shows, we've got I think a well-designed project. So it's probably got to the end of stage, well, it's probably the end of stage 2 and into stage 3, into the sort of the more technical elements of it. But they've got a really strong starting point. They know how the scheme should look. They've done their market research as to what they need. They know what the sort of key risks are and the challenges are, and it's ready for them to take forward, which we sort of understand that they're doing as we speak, really.
What did you design though? What was the technology that was used, Adam?
So my recollection of it, without opening it up, is that sort of LoRa gateway, which will be in place through a sort of complementary program covering the town centre, and then the biggest thing will be soil moisture sensors put in place in the planters that sort of comprise the Britain in Bloom green infrastructure, I suppose. That will, send data to a dashboard from which alerts can be set, and that will be able to inform the sort of watering schedule, which is pretty rigid, I guess, up to now, or was pretty rigid and pretty uninformed by the actual sort of requirements. So yeah, that data will be able to help them do the watering much more sort of efficiently and effectively, I suppose. Yeah, the case study sets out the sort of hardware suggested in much more detail.
Great, thank you. So as you probably know, the session was obviously to launch the delivery manual, but we also have the quarterly networking meetings. So if there aren't any other questions regarding the delivery manual, I don't know if we want to go around the room kind of introducing anything that we're working on or any kind of barriers that we're having, or any comments about the delivery manual. I know we don't have much time left. Does anyone have anything pressing that'd like to go first? So Damien, got your hand up.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's Damien Williams. I'm the IoT delivery officer for Blaenau Gwent. We have a dozen LoRaWAN gateways up and running at the minute, and I was just basically wondering for anyone else in other authorities who've got the gateways up and running. A number of them on our end, we run them through SIM cards, but they can be a little bit unreliable. I was wondering if anyone else was having that issue where they're sort of disconnecting and then reconnecting, and if they have had that issue, how they've gone about sort of rectifying it or managing it.
I think Isabel has some experience in this field.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Kiki. Yeah, I know with us sometimes we did have issues with them going off and online and going back on again, and we found it was a signal issue. So, for example, in mould, and Kiki's very familiar with what we've done in mould, but we had to put an additional gateway in for the other side of town because there's an issue that the signal, because we have very thick walls in some of the buildings and some tall buildings, and it's undulating terrain, it wasn't reaching the other end for some of the LoRaWAN and devices. So sorry, the Cisco Meraki's. So what we did is we put an additional gateway, and that seemed to rectify it, because we did have signal, but it was just dropping out. I don't know if that's the problem that you've got. So when we put the additional gateway, that seemed to make it, well, it's been stable since, touch wood.
Oh yes, excellent, thanks. Yeah, it is kind of the issue we have is we have a because we're working through the SIM cards. I've been told that it could be like a connectivity issue with the SIM card and the provider it connects to. So we've been trialing also Pico Next internal gateways, similar to yourself, so we can boost the sort of signal of a LoRaWAN in a sort of more old-fashioned kind of buildings with thicker walls and whatnot. But we've got a couple of locations where the gateways themselves just sort of disconnect and then they'll be offline for a week. We reboot them and they'll
Oh.
come back online, and then sometimes they'll go off and on. So they seem pretty sort of haphazard where they're connecting. That's basically our problem.
Yeah.
We're thinking it's through because of the SIM cards, basically. But I don't know if anyone
Well,
else
we're
had
on
those issues.
we're on O2 SIM cards, and we've got MikroTik devices on the Wazy Waves. So, but we the additional gateway went on a street column rather than on a building. We just mounted it.
helped.
Yeah.
So that might be worth looking into. I don't know if Will has got something to add to that. Got your hand up, Will.
Yeah, I was going to, but I think you've kind of answered my question when you said they've gone off for days. It's not likely to be what I thought it might be, but yeah, we'd favour an Ethernet backhaul wherever possible, and we do have a few that are on SIM cards, and they do occasionally just disappear. Sometimes very briefly. We've got one or two that do it very regularly, but I'm just actually investigating at the moment whether they are actually going offline or that it is just the packet broker on TTN that is reporting them offline because there's some delay in them if they're getting an address renewal from the service provider. Because I'm not actually convinced all the time that although they're reporting offline that they are offline. But if it's days, then that's a different issue.
Thanks. Well, it's funny you should mention that because I had it last week where basically all my gateways came up offline, and I had a moment where I just was shocked. But when I actually clicked on them and looked into them, they were actually sending and receiving. So I think
Yes.
it was something to do with the Things network rather than all our gateways just simultaneously dropped down. But yeah, there's some that's sort of continually offline for a long while, and then we'll sort of connect and then disconnect. So we think it's the SIM cards, but like you say, we have had that issue as well with the Things network notifying it basically.
Problem shared is a problem halved. Is there anything else anyone would like to discuss or anything? Marianne? I don't think we've met Marianne.
Yeah, hi, Kiki. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, we did investigate the football counters a little while ago. I probably need to pick that up with you again as well. We had a bit of a problem with finding locations, sites for it. I think people were, especially with the cost of living crisis, were concerned that if we putting them on their walls and then expecting them to sort of cover the cost of the power, etc. We were kind of drawing a bit of a blank on that, and I think we were looking to maybe connect them to lampposts and things like that. I don't know how we.
Sorry, Marianne.
Sorry.
Where are you based?
Usk in Monmouthshire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So David, did you want to step in there, or was that something else?
Sorry, I was just going to put a build on what you were discussing before, Kiki, around the gateways.
Oh,
so
okay.
we're quite fortunate in Wrexham to have Ethernet to all. We've got three. We've kind of formed a triangle around the city centre, and it's important as well understanding what kind of sensors you want to connect to them. So we've got some car parking sensors which transmit quite regular, so they have to be quite close to a gateway. And other sensors. So the dashboard we've got, we're allowed 50,000 transmissions over 12 months. And I've just spent the day with Gary Howells here today, and we've kind of configured the sensors that they were set to 300 seconds. But we found out that would only give us a few months data, so we've kind of altered the transmission times now to 1800 seconds. So it gives us more timescales over data for data to be captured as well. So that's something to be considered. The other thing, I don't know, has everyone got one of those? Is it a Dennis field testers? Has everyone got one of those? Yeah.
The handheld signal testers.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got one of those. Well, we gave it to Street Scene because they do the maintenance and installs.
Oh, do they? So again, that's very useful as well when you're going out mapping, looking to place sensors, and obviously that reports to TTN and your dashboard as well. So if you haven't got one, it's well worth the £200 to get one of those. That's it.
Thanks, David. Really helpful. So sorry to just go back to Marion's issue. This is something that we've definitely experienced as well in Gwynedd and Anglesey. So we, as Menton Mourne, on behalf of Gwynedd and Anglesey County Councils, we've installed Wi-Fi across the two counties. Now, almost every day we have an issue of a shop closing down, switching the box off. So what we've done moving forward is we have been installing them on lampposts. So it's a bit of a longer process in terms of getting agreements from the councils, from highways, finding lampposts that are adequate for the installation. So obviously things like sharing Christmas tree lights, the council are a bit funny about which posts you can use. And then I know Isabel's had issues with some of the older posts and water ingress. So there's a lot to consider with that as well. But in terms of a long-term solution, I think street furniture is the way to go.
I'll try and take that up with the MCC as well, then to see how they're progressing with it. Great, thanks.
You're welcome. And if you'd like a further chat about the ins and outs of that, then you're welcome to get in touch.
Right, thanks. Okay.
Thank you. We were thinking as well, moving forward with these sessions, it might be interesting and more useful maybe to have sessions based on certain challenges. So I'm sure there are lots of people who have that challenge. We could dedicate a session to it and maybe involve specialists as well who could help out with those talks. Does anyone else have an issue that they'd like to talk about? Or it doesn't have to be an issue, something that's worked really well would be lovely to hear about as well.
I think it's good having this opportunity for all to kind of bounce things off one another, because we're all learning together, aren't we? It's a lot of it is literally trial and error through the pilot and sharing those solutions with other people. And I know I've done that with Cheshire as well. And that helps because everyone's got their own different approaches, which is good because you go about it in different ways and learn from one another. And I think certainly for me, I think it's valuable having the opportunity to have a round table, because I think showing that best practice is really good, because it just saves a lot of time and pain. Because I think it's just an opportunity to kind of get a little bit further ahead and kind of learn. And also the videos that you've done, Kiki, they've been really helpful because it encapsulates a lot of the things in other areas that you can pick up on. So yeah, they're definitely helpful. I don't know if you've got any more planned for other areas at all.
Yeah, so I'm really happy to turn up with my tiny microphones and camera and do any case studies. So anyone that has a story, anyone that has an experience that they'd like to share, something that's been a bit of a headache that they think would be really useful for someone else to know, just let me know. I'm really happy to help out with that. We're looking as well at options of sharing these lessons a bit easier. So maybe having a standard form that people can fill in just to record, what was the budget, what were the limitations, what were the barriers, what worked, what didn't work. Maybe that could then be part of the continuation of the delivery manual. It could almost be, could kind of feed itself in a way. But yeah, I think these sessions certainly really interesting from my perspective. I think, yeah, obviously a lot more people turned up than last time, so that must be a good sign. Peter, did you have something to add?
Yeah, well done for everybody on your journey so far with LoRaWAN and Wi-Fi analytics. Absolutely brilliant. It's amazing to hear all of this stuff from those of you who've kind of started from scratch and become experts in your own right. So as you know, I live near Munt in West Wales, and we've got a Cisco Meraki unit there. And I was saying to the owner of the cafe, or the lady who runs the cafe on behalf of the National Trust, you're missing a trick. You should do sunset cocktails. Anyway, she didn't do sunset cocktails. She actually did a barbecue night with her parents' farm's organic beef. So they had a organic beef burger at night, and it was an absolute resounding success. So much so those traffic jams going down to Munt on the evening. The lesson learned was, even though the timing between 5 and 7 was ideal and fitted with the data, what we didn't account for, I suppose, was the cars leaving the beach coming home, going home, who might not have been informed of, barbecue type of evening. So, but anyway, it was good, and it was I suppose you could call it a data-driven decision, which brought additional value to that little business. So I wanted to share that with you. And on Damien's problem, so I purchased those gateways a while ago, and I have to be honest, they weren't the best branded gateways. We won't say which brand they were, but they're pretty cheap. And we used SIM cards for those, which, Damien, if you wouldn't mind penciling in some time with me on that, because the subscription, because this was before your time, that we purchased was like a kind of an upfront payment for 3 years. I'm sure that's coming to an end soon. But the reason we put SIM cards in and not connected it to Ethernet was because of a technical reason with your IT support company. It was going to take ages, so we made the decision, let's bypass them completely. We'll stick a SIM card, but actually they're all located near an Ethernet point. And now that the IT people have kind of caught up with what LoRaWAN is and don't have the same concerns as they once did, I think it's an easier sell for those gateways to be plugged into Ethernet. So yeah, maybe if we can pencil in something next week, Damien, we can fix that. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem at all, Peter, and thanks for that information. That's useful. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. That is really